Hi, I'm Derek with Boise Cylinder Head Services. Today we're going to go over a few measuring devices that we use here at the shop. Just a few things that we have on hand that we use on a daily basis. We got electronic digital calipers. We use those pretty much for most of our measuring to get a roundabout number. They're not as accurate as our other tools, like these micrometers I have laid out here. These are a lot more accurate, within a few thousandths more accurate. We're going to go over measuring a used valve and what dimensions we need to look at in order to choose and verify that our new valve is proper. We're also going to go over how to measure a guide, the outside diameter, the inside diameter, and the valve stem seal that you'd want to use on that guide and the valve combo. This is a spring testing device. It tests the pressures of the springs. This is more for high performance work when you're getting a new cam, to verify that your open and closed pressures are where you want them. We have a dual spring setup today that we'll talk about how you measure both of those springs at the same time using the retainer. We also have feeler gauges. You can use these for checking the warp, how warped the cylinder head is, as well as checking, say, valve clearance in between the cam and the lifter lobes. This is a Subaru Turbo cylinder head, and we use these very commonly on these to check to see if your valves are tight, which would cause a misfire. And also, when we're rebuilding the heads, we got to verify that we're within the specifications that the factory calls for. All right, so this is a caliper. It's a digital caliper, and you want to turn it on, of course, zero out, close it all the way, and click the zeroing button so that you can start at a zero measurement. We'll start out by measuring a used valve, the dimensions on that. So you slide this open, and you should see it increasing in number. This one is metric and inches. So for this video, we're going to use inches. And we just pull it open here using this rolling feature that it has to open it up and close it. And then we close it back down on the valve, making sure both the ends are flat against the sides we're trying to measure. This one comes out at about 0.368 of an inch. We'll also use this micrometer because it's going to be a little more accurate. So this, you can set the zero. It's a little more difficult to set the zero on these. Let's see. So this is a standard 1-inch tool that we can use to verify our settings are correct. You just open this all the way up until this measuring piece will fit inside the micrometer. You want to make sure both ends are flat against the measuring tool. This also has a loose feature on it so that it can open up and adjust, and so one technician is consistent with another technician. If you were to crank down on this side, you'd get inaccurate readings. And so we want to see, I don't know if you can see that here, we want to see that zero lined up with that line to be accurate. And there's a way to adjust this right here with another tool that you can just shift this thing around, lock it in place. So back to our valve, we'll go ahead and measure the stem. And so this particular caliper goes from 0 to 1 inch. 0 being all the way closed, 1 inch pretty much all the way open, but it has increments right here that each line is 25 thousandths. When you're measuring a guide, you can use the 3, I got 1, 2, and 3 marks on here. That'll give you 0.1 of an inch, 0.2 of an inch, 0.3 of an inch, and then each little line is 25 thousandths. And then it has additional lines on here for when you're in between those 25 thousandths. The reading on this right here is 50.371 of an inch, which is pretty close to 11/32. And that's what we expected for this valve. So on our new valve, we just want to confirm that it is the same measurement as the old valve, which we were getting 371 as well. And then for the head diameter, we usually use calipers for these because we can be within a few thousandths and know that we're going to be correct. This new valve here is 1.1 inches and 58 thousandths. So we just got to confirm with our old valve that that is pretty close. And this one's 1.558. So it's identical. This valve will definitely replace this valve. There's a couple other things you can check, like the tip, the groove to tip length, which is let's see here, 0.348 of an inch. On these used valves, sometimes you grind off the top of them when rebuilding, and so it could be a little bit different, but as long as we're in the same ballpark, we should be good. We're getting 0.3 on this one. So it's been worn down, ground down to fit the application that it's going into. But this valve will definitely replace this one. Alright, so on a guide we can measure the outside diameters and inside diameters to confirm that it's accurate to what we want. This is a pretty bulk guide that fits into a 1/2 inch diameter hole. We have core drill reamers that drill out those holes on our other machines. So we know that we want about 1/2 inch on these. And we're getting 0.501 on that. So that's perfect. It'll give us an interference fit. Once we drill out that hole and drive this guide into it, it'll be locked in place. We also want to confirm that the inside diameter is accurate to the valve that we're going to put in it. And we're getting 0.373, which means that it should fit over this valve with about 1/1000 to 2/1000 of clearance, which is what we're seeing now. There's no wiggle from valve to guide. So that's accurate. Another thing that we'd want to look at is the length. And if you have the cylinder head that you're going to install this in, you'd pre-check the original guide to make sure that the length is at this length or shorter, because we can trim this one up after we install it. And we got our valve stem seal for this setup. And the valve stem seals are, they go on the end of the guide here, and the valve goes through it. And this keeps oil from freely flowing out the guide. So we need to make sure that these clearances are proper so that it fits against the stem of the valve. It's not going to let a whole bunch of oil through. It still does let a little bit through, but just enough to keep the system lubricated. So how we measure this valve stem seal is very similar to how we measured the guide. I'm just going to go to the inside diameter here and use the caliper points on the back side and just stretch it out till it touches that rubber just lightly. This does have an interference fit, so it is going to be quite a bit tighter than the outside diameter of the guide. We're looking at 0.489, so that gives us at least a 0.100 press fit onto the guide, which is good. You want it to squish onto the guide so that it'll hold tight while it's running. The next piece that you'd measure is the stem diameter hole. And same thing, we want an interference fit here, so it should be a little bit tinier than the valve stem. We're getting 0.339, which is about 33,000 smaller than the stem. This also has a gator spring on it. I don't know if you can see that clearly. But that spring also helps hold tension on the rubber against the stem to reduce oil going along the stem of the valve through the guide and into the combustion chamber. Another way that we measure the inside diameter of a guide is using a pilot here. This is a 373 carbide pilot, and you can watch where that thing, it's a tapered tool, so up here is a little bit bigger than down here. So when it goes into the guide, wherever it stops, we can mark that with a marker and measure it with a micrometer, and that'll be a little more accurate when you're searching for a specific guide to valve clearance. This is the most accurate way we have on hand today. So just right where that line is, you take your micrometer, measure that down. So we're getting 372 here, which gives us about a thousandths clearance, which on most cars is appropriate. This is a valve from a Ford 360 head that usually requires 1.5 thousandths clearance to 2 thousandths clearance, so we definitely want to ream that out all said and done to make sure we have the proper clearance. Next we can go over our valves, or our shims here. They come in a lot of different thicknesses, as small as 1.5 thousandths, that's 0.0015, all the way up to about 32 thousandths, 0.032. On certain heads like this, we have set clearances that it needs to be in between the lifter cup and the heel of the cam. And on this used head, we'd expect it probably to be a little bit tighter than spec. But we can use these feeler gauges to, with the lobe pointing up straight above the lifter, we can measure in between the lifter cup and the heel. And we just check the thickness of this feeler gauge. This is 4 thousandths, and that goes right through. So we can bump it up to the next size, or quite a bit larger, to see how big our gap is. This is about 11 thousandths, that still goes through. The specification for this particular engine valve clearance is 13 thousandths to 15 thousandths, so we'll do a 13 and see if that's... So that one doesn't want to go in. So that means we're smaller than 13 thousandths if the 13 thousandths feeler gauge won't go in. An 11 thousandths would, so we'll try a 12. The 12 thousandths slides in right nice and freely, and the 13 won't. So that tells me that we're a little bit above 12 thousandths clearance on this particular valve lifter setup. Alright, but that's... When you're doing a valve job on these things and you're rebuilding this, you need to make sure that your clearances are set within spec, all said and done. If you're checking a used cylinder head on the car, we always recommend that you check the clearances, because these things will wear into the head, the valve will wear into the head and create tight clearances, which could cause a misfire and serious issues with your cylinder head. That would lead to needing it to be rebuilt. Alright, that's all for valve clearance there. We're going to move on to this retainer dual spring setup. There's a couple ways you can measure this. We use calipers to get a general reading, so we'll do that. We'll start out with. So to measure these, there's your flat spots on the top and flat spots on the bottom. You just want to make sure that they're flat against your calipers as best as you can. We're getting 2.378. And if you're trying to replace an old spring with a new spring, you want to measure these and measure your new ones to make sure they're the same free length. This one's about 2.3. They're pretty close to the same. And this spring here is a dual spring combination for performance, like on a big block or a small block Chevy. This spring goes inside the larger spring, just like so. If you only had the single spring, you wouldn't have to use this retainer to measure both, but I'll go over that in a minute. This is our spring testing machine. It goes up to about 500 pounds. And what we can do here is at different measurements, that's not going to show up. At different measurements, about 2 inches, we're looking at about 55 thousandths clearance, or 55 pounds of pressure. As we go down, that increases more and more, and depending on where your closed pressure is and your open pressure is where you'd want to verify this. So let's say our closed pressure was about 1.7. We're getting about 110 pounds, which is pretty good for closed pressure. And then you got your cam lift, which say your lift was about 500 thousandths. You'd want to increase that, shrink that down the extra 500 thousandths to 1.250, and that'd give us a about 200 pounds at closed pressure, or excuse me, at open pressure. With the dual spring combination, you'd slide the dual spring in there, and to be accurate, you'd want to use your retainer as well. So you push your retainer down in there, and you have to measure the thickness of that retainer to subtract that from our gauge here. This is about 100 thousandths. So whatever we're shooting for, we were at 1.7 before, we'll have it at 1.8 to compensate for our retainer. And the reason we got to use a retainer for this is that there's a couple different steps on this retainer, and this will contact the inner spring and this will contact the outer spring, and so you need that to get an accurate spring pressure reading. So we'll put that in our measuring device here, go down to the same 1.7, and with that, well, 1.8 to compensate for our retainer. That puts us at about 200 pounds at the open pressure, which is a significant difference, just adding that inner spring. And if we had 500 thousandths of lift, we'd take that down to 1.250, which with this particular spring goes up almost double. We're at 400 pounds of pressure. So for certain performance applications, you need a lot of lift to move this valve up and down without having valve flow. If you don't have enough pressure, your valve's going to stay open and gases are going to blow by, and it's going to create a big inefficiency of power. And I think that's all that we have for today. Huh? Comments? If there's any questions that you have about anything I've gone over today, please leave comments and questions in the comments link below. I hope you enjoyed this video, got some education from it. Thank you for watching, and have a wonderful day. Thank you for watching our video. I hope you enjoyed it. If I come butchering it. Please subscribe to our channel if you like our videos. It'll really help our channel out. Hit that ding bell button so you can get our notifications. And go ahead and comment down below on future videos you'd like to see. It's all in your head.